Hello everybody.
Hi.
Are you ever too nice for your own good?
I'm so nice.
And being nice isn't really that effective when it comes to marketing yourself or standing out from the crowd, because we feel that being nice can make you a little bit vanilla.
Yeah, just a bit bland.
So we'd like to share our stories about being too nice, because Bev and I both suffer with this particular condition, and 3 tips to help you overcome the curse of being a bit too nice.
Yes. So let me tell you a little story about how I started out in my career. When I left school, I became a secretary. And what do you have to be when you're a secretary? Nice to everybody. So that was all fine. That sort of went along with my character as well at the time. So that was all good. But then I made this giant leap into music journalism. And I realised that being nice was not really the ticket. It was great in terms of building relationships and getting interviews. Helped me get an interview with Spandau Ballet. But I needed to have an opinion. I needed to be a critic. And I found that very challenging to begin with. So my answer to that was to come up with a bit of an alter ego. So I had a pen name. It was Betty Page. So Betty was the one with a strong opinion. She could be a bit of a bitch in print. And Beverly was the one who was still very nice and you know, wasn't that person who was willing to give a band album review 1 star or whatever. So that's how I got by it. I mean, that had its own issues around some kind of identity crisis, but that's another story. But that's how I dealt with it to begin with.
But it saved your bacon, because you had this other alternative, you know, this enigma.
Yes.
If you haven't done the archetypes quiz yet, try it, because that is an enigma strategy.
Yeah, my enigma strategy was to protect myself with this other character.
And this other character could be a bit mean and provocative,
bit
but Beverly was still nice.
Oh, nice.
But what is interesting for me is that can be a dilemma as well, can't it? Because when it comes to, say you're going to be interviewed as Beverly, then who are you going to be?
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, there's something about learning to accept both sides of yourself.
Oh yeah.
And to like get a little bit more comfortable with the sort of side of you that's opinionated, because I recognise this too. So I'm a charm type. So if you've done the archetypes and you've come out as a charmer, you might recognise the tendency to rely on your charm rather than rely on having an opinion, which is what you suffered with. So I had a similar dilemma. When I started out my career, the very first thing I did, I worked in a radio station, BBC Radio Merseyside in Liverpool, and as a charm type, I was sent out on an interview. My first hard-hitting story was to go and interview a bunch of old age pensioners who were doing a talent competition. And I learned this charming side of me was incredibly useful, because I could like charm the pants off them. They all told me all their stories and secrets and sang to me, told me jokes, and I came up with a fantastic story because I used my charm.
I think that's the really positive aspect of charm, charisma, building relationships. The downside is when you go into people pleasing.
That's exactly right.
You just want everyone to like you.
You do. And what happened is in the same role at Radio Merseyside, when it came to like being in a meeting with a bunch of journalists, and everybody was vying for attention, coming up with story ideas, this slightly confrontational atmosphere.
Not nice.
I froze because I was like, oh, I can't join in, because all I knew was this strategy was like getting people to like me. And I would just be a bit ineffectual, actually, because I didn't know how to express myself.
Sort of cut off your power.
Yeah, and so I didn't have this enigma type, you know. I basically went into a slightly different career for a while, and just really struggled to know how to express myself. So I think it is an issue, because if you start contorting yourself because you don't want to offend people, then you just end up being a little bit vanilla, and that's no good if you're an artist and you want people to feature you or talk about you. So we want to talk about 3 tips here that we think work particularly well for charm types.
Yes.
And talented every
and probably
people.
enigmas as well, actually.
Yeah, I would say so. So the first tip is actually learning to see yourself as a brand.
Yeah. So we've got 2 very good examples of charmers who are also very successful business people.
Yeah.
So one is Kylie Minogue and the other one is Dolly Parton.
And we think they're still really nice.
Yeah.
But they're also businesswomen and they see themselves as businesswomen.
Yeah.
And therefore they construct a really clear identity around who they are. So they bring in stories around their background. You know, Dolly talks about where she's from, and she has, you know, she tells the story of her upbringing, how tough that was. And Kylie talks about her sister and their relationship. So I think charm types are very good at kind of really involving you with their whole story and their background, and you kind of feel chummy and part of their world.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
draws people in.
That's very relatable as well. So the second tip we have for you is take yourself lightly. I think what often happens with creatives is that because they take their work so seriously, they sometimes come across as a bit earnest and worthy. And there's something lovely about bringing humour in, a little bit of humour, a little bit of lightness, a bit like Dolly Parton when she talks about, you know, it costs a lot of money to look this cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can bring a bit of lightness and humour into the way that you communicate, it just makes you that much more relatable as well.
And I think that starts with finding what you do funny, like not taking yourself overly seriously. Can you find lightness in it?
Yeah.
Because then that doesn't feel... you don't feel so pressurized to please in interviews. If you can laugh at yourself, that's very charming too.
It is.
And it brings in like another dimension if you're doing interviews. So what are funny stories that have happened to you along the way that can make people laugh?
So the third point is actually almost the opposite of that, isn't it? It's like the your darker times.
Yeah, because the awful the tendency for charm types is to think I've got to be nice and happy all the time because then people will like me more. And actually, that's really dull.
Yeah.
There's nothing more boring than someone who's just always,
oh no, everything's fine.
Boring. So we actually think you want to find the darker stories. What difficult things have you been through in your life that you can share in an interview?
Talk about we call it the bumps in the road. Talk about the bumps in the road along the way. That's what makes you a fully rounded person.
Yeah, and think of Adele. She's amazing at that. She
so
shows all her war wounds.
In her songs and her interviews, actually.
Yeah, because it just makes you more relatable and more interesting, and it gives you more texture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we hope you like our 3 tips.
Yes.
Think of yourself as a brand.
Take yourself lightly.
And share the bumps in the road. And finally, we have our event coming up. If you are in London on the 29th of January, we have our Trailblazer Tribe, our community event, which is amazing.
We love it.
We do love it. And there'll be a little workshop on thinking about how to show up and have more impact.
Yeah. And you have lots of opportunity to meet like-minded people and connect. And it's just such a lovely, relaxed, fun and, you know, meaningful evening, actually. It really is.
Yeah. So tickets are early bird price until January.
Yeah.
So grab yourself an early bird price. It's only 15 quid and it's going to be a super night, and you can get that in the link below this blog. And if you like this blog, do share a comment, particularly if you're a charm type, below. What did you get from the blog and what will you take away?
Okay.
Bye for now.
See you then.